Markets are lurching, not drifting. One day surging, the next suffocating. Regional banks whisper insolvency. Layoffs spread quietly through offices, warehouses, and startups. Credit lines that felt automatic are suddenly questioned, cut, or repriced overnight. This is not a healthy system cooling off. It is a machine seizing. What you are watching is not a routine correction or another clickbait crash headline. It is the opening stage of a coordinated freefall built on years of fake stability. In this video, we connect the pressure points they isolate: inflation, exploding debt, a rigged housing market, de-dollarization, political dysfunction, collapsing trust. Stay to see who gets wiped out, who survives, and why most are staring at the wrong signals. To understand what is breaking now, rewind to 2008. The system crashed, and instead of forcing real losses, we bailed it out. Rates were slammed to zero, easy money flooded Wall Street. Every emergency fix whispered the same lie: this can go on forever. Corporations gorged on cheap debt. Asset bubbles stopped being a warning sign and became policy. Washington learned it could mask stagnation with stimulus and call it stability. Then came the pandemic. Trillions created in months. Supply chains torn and rewired. Demand distorted. Inflation lit, then denied, then spun. What you feel today, shrinking paychecks, unstable prices, constant unease, is not random noise. It is the system sagging under years of borrowed time. And at the center of this fragility sits the first hard limit: the debt trap. Every illusion of stability in this economy is built on one thing: debt. Not just government debt, not just corporate leverage, not just your credit cards and mortgage. All of it stacked together, compounding, feeding on the same rising interest rates that were supposed to normalize the system and instead are detonating its weak points. Start with the federal government. Before 2008, the numbers were huge. Now they are surreal, blasting past total GDP with no credible path down. For years, zero rates made this mountain feel weightless. Refinancing was painless. Interest costs were an afterthought. That era is over. With rates higher, interest payments are exploding into one of the largest expenses in the budget, competing with defense, healthcare, Social Security. To keep paying, Washington can cut services, raise taxes, print money, or borrow more at higher cost. Every path tightens the noose. This is where the soft landing story breaks. The same higher rates hammer corporations that gorged on cheap credit. A decade of free money created zombies that only survived because debt was nearly free. Now, as loans roll over, commercial real estate faces refinancing at double or more, while offices sit half empty. Startups built on growth at all costs pay real interest on shrinking revenue. Highly leveraged buyouts find yesterday's structures underwater. Layoffs, canceled projects, emergency sales, quiet bankruptcies follow. Early signals of systemic stress. Households are sinking too. Credit card balances at records with double-digit interest. Auto loans stretched to 7 or 8 years. Student loan bills restarting into inflated rents. Food, energy. Wages cannot keep up. Families use debt to fund basics, and each rate hike hits like a pay cut. The tool sold as the cure for inflation is suffocating consumers and employers together. Now put this on one timeline. Government, corporations, households all must roll over trillions at higher rates, drawing from the same strained pool of credit. Any spike in yields, any dip in confidence, any recession, and something breaks: a funding freeze, cascading defaults, a rapid loss of faith. There is no safe layer left to absorb impact. When everyone is maxed out, there is no clean bailout. Saving one side endangers another. More printing risks, torching the currency. More tightening risks, collapsing the debt structure. If this debt pile is the fuel, the danger ahead is darker, because the very dollars this debt is built on are starting to lose their untouchable status. You are told inflation is cooling. The charts look calmer, the headlines softer, the officials more relaxed. The crisis, they say, is behind us. But step outside the narrative and into your life. Your rent did not fall. Your groceries did not return to 2019 prices. Healthcare, childcare, insurance, utilities, fees on everything from banking to flights, still grinding higher, still outrunning your paycheck. The good news on inflation rests on averages and adjustments that ignore the ways your standard of living is being quietly sliced apart. You see it in shrinkflation. Smaller packages at the same price. Cheaper ingredients replacing quality. Service stripped out, warranties shortened, hidden fees layered in. You pay the same or more and receive less. On paper, inflation is under control. In reality, you are running faster to stay in place. This widening gap between official statistics and lived experience is not just annoying, it is corrosive. It tells you someone is gaming the story. Now look at the institution supposedly steering this chaos, the Federal Reserve. For years after 2008, rates were pinned near zero, markets were conditioned, any sign of trouble, and the Fed would print. Then, after the pandemic money surge and the inflation spike it helped unleash, came the pivot. From transitory to the fastest rate hikes in decades. From endless ease to sudden shock therapy. Those hikes are sold as responsible, but they create an impossible corner. Keep rates high, and the cost of money crushes everything built on cheap credit. Over-leveraged banks, real estate, zombie firms, sectors that cannot survive true pricing. Defaults climb, delinquencies rise, bank balance sheets crack, unemployment surges. Cut rates too soon or too aggressively, and another nightmare opens. Inflation flares back, the currency weakens, savers and retirees are punished again, and the signal to the world is simple: panic behind the podium. Watch how this is played out. First, confident assurances. Inflation is temporary. Then a scramble. Emergency facilities for banks, liquidity backstops, quiet guarantees. Each wobble in markets is met with a new acronym program overnight. The pattern is clear to anyone paying attention. Big players expect rescue. Asset prices are protected. Meanwhile, ordinary people are told to be grateful their savings earn a little more interest while their costs explode and their future is devalued. With each U-turn, each broken promise, each emergency tool rolled out with rehearsed calm, credibility bleeds away. Policy used to be about setting expectations. Now it is about firefighting consequences of the last round of firefighting. Every intervention buys less time and costs more stability. This is policy fatigue, a system that can only lurch from stimulus to tightening and back again, leaving deeper scars on the way. So ask the question almost no one on television will touch. What happens when people stop believing the managers are in control? When households assume prices will always rise faster than wages? When companies assume rules will keep shifting without warning? When foreign governments assume the Fed will sacrifice long-term value for short-term calm? That disbelief is already spreading, and it is beginning to pool at the base of American power, the dollar itself. For decades, the great advantage of the United States was invisible to most people, but obvious to anyone in power. The dollar sat at the center of everything: oil, food, metals, global shipping, corporate debt, government reserves, cross-border payments, priced and settled in dollars. Foreign governments parked their savings in U.S. treasuries because they were liquid, trusted, and backed by the world's dominant military and economy. This exorbitant privilege meant America could borrow more, for longer, at cheaper rates than anyone else, and export paper in exchange for real goods. That privilege turned debt into a business model. As long as the world demanded dollars, Washington could run deficits without immediate punishment. When crises hit, the Federal Reserve could open swap lines, flood markets with liquidity, and the rest of the world would absorb it because they needed the currency. The dollar was not just money. It was infrastructure, weapon, safety blanket. But that foundation is no longer unquestioned. Quietly, piece by piece, countries are experimenting at the edges. Major energy exporters cutting bilateral deals in local currencies, Asian partners settling more trade-off dollar, central banks adding gold and diversifying their reserves, groups like BRICS discussing ways to reduce dependence on U.S.-controlled rails. Not a dramatic exit, but a cautious hedge against a system they no longer fully trust. Each move is small alone. Together, they signal something new. Holding only dollars and treasuries now looks like a political and financial risk. When the U.S. uses its financial system to sanction rivals, freeze reserves, cut off access, it sends a message even to neutrals and allies. Your savings here are only safe as long as we approve of you. Rational actors respond by building alternatives. As that mindset spreads, automatic demand for U.S. debt erodes, and this is where America's domestic fragility collides with its global position. To keep buyers coming, Washington faces two levers: raise yields or tolerate a weaker dollar. Higher yields mean higher interest costs on an already monstrous debt load, deepening the trap. A weaker dollar makes imports more expensive. Energy, electronics, fertilizer, machinery, feeding inflation back into every American household and business. There is no painless setting. Pay more to borrow and you stress your own system. Let the currency slide and you hammer citizens' purchasing power. Try to offset both with more printing, and you risk accelerating the diversification you fear as foreign holders quietly step away. In past downturns, the US could export part of its crisis outward, print, devalue slightly, and force the world to absorb the adjustment because they had no real alternative. But as more economies route around the dollar for some of their trade and reserves, that release valve weakens. If the next shock hits while trust is already frayed, more of the blowback stays home. Higher funding costs, faster price spikes, less foreign appetite to finance Washington's promises. So when you hear that de-dollarization is overhyped, understand the nuance. This is not about a sudden collapse. It is a slow repricing of American risk by the rest of the world at the exact moment the US needs infinite patience and credit. As the monetary bedrock starts to crack, the question becomes simple: what is left underneath? Strip away privilege and engineering, and you are forced to confront the health of the real economy, the jobs, factories, energy, and housing that determine whether a society can actually stand on its own. Behind the charts and the currency games is a simpler question: what does this country actually make, and how do its people actually live? For decades, the answer has been quietly downgraded. Industry after industry was shipped overseas in search of cheaper labor and higher margins. Pharmaceuticals, electronics, machinery, basic goods once produced at home are now imported. The surface logic was efficiency. The hidden cost was vulnerability. Recent shocks tore away the illusion. Empty shelves, back-ordered parts, shortages of critical medical supplies, delays in autos, electronics, fertilizer, a virus outbreak, or a port closure on the other side of the world, and American factories stall, construction halts, hospitals scramble. The more we optimized for cost and profit, the more we accepted dependence on fragile, distant supply chains for essentials of modern life. As the dollar's grip weakens, that dependency grows even more dangerous and expensive. At the same time, we are told the job market is strong. Official unemployment looks low, but talk to real people. Millions patch together gig work, side hustles, contract roles with no security, full-time jobs without benefits, part-time shifts that swing week to week, people working 50, 60, 70 hours and still unable to build a buffer. Open positions exist, but at wages that do not match rent, debt, or basic survival in major cities. Productivity rose, technology advanced, corporate profits soared, yet the share flowing to workers stagnated or slipped. Gains went into buybacks, speculation, inflated valuations. The labor market strength you hear about often means 2 or 3 precarious jobs where one stable job used to exist. It is motion, not mobility. Nowhere does this fragility cut deeper than in housing. For most families, a home is supposed to be stability, savings, shelter in one. Instead, it has been turned into an over-financialized asset class. Years of cheap money and limited supply pushed prices far beyond incomes. Then institutional buyers and Wall Street funds stepped in, bidding against families, buying entire neighborhoods in bulk. As mortgage rates surged, a trap snapped shut. Owners with low rates will not move, freezing supply. New buyers face historically unaffordable combinations of price and interest. Many are locked out completely. For them, renting is no longer temporary. It is a sentence. Landlords, including corporate ones, use tight markets to raise rents relentlessly. Young adults delay marriage, children, roots, not by choice but because the system has priced them out of a normal life. Housing becomes both symptom and weapon. It reflects easy money flooding into assets instead of production, and transfers wealth upward as those with capital acquire more units from those forced to sell or forever rent. It amplifies every other pressure. When shelter devours half your income, nothing is left to cushion shocks, pursue education, or invest in skills. Put this together: a country that outsourced its factories, financialized its housing, and downgraded its jobs now faces rising costs for essentials, tightening credit, and a fraying currency advantage. The headline data can still flash resilient, but if people cannot afford stable shelter, cannot save, cannot see a path to better, that strength is cosmetic. At that point, the crisis stops being just economic. It seeps into how people think, trust, vote, and react. When daily life feels rigged and permanently insecure, the next stage of freefall is triggered not only in balance sheets, but in confidence, cohesion, control. That is where the shock becomes self-feeding. Modern finance is not built on vaults of cash. It is built on belief. Banks assume deposits will sit still. Markets assume there will always be a buyer at the next tick. Politicians assume they can roll the debt forever. Households assume the numbers in their accounts will hold their value. As long as that shared faith holds, the system functions. The moment doubt starts to spread, Everything that once moved slowly begins to move at once. You have already seen flashes of this. A few viral posts, and suddenly regional banks face digital bank runs, billions vanishing in hours. Confused assurances from officials collide with plunging stock prices, deposit lines, chaotic press conferences. Social media amplifies every rumor faster than any institution can respond. People no longer wait for confirmation. They act first, withdraw, sell, move, hoard, then ask questions later. Layer onto that a political environment that looks less like governance and more like permanent crisis theater. Shutdown threats as routine leverage. Debt ceiling brinkmanship as hostage tactic. Budgets dragged to the brink, then patched with temporary deals nobody trusts. Each episode signals to citizens, businesses, and foreign partners that rules are disposable. Trust in traditional referees collapses alongside it. Many no longer believe official inflation statistics, job numbers, or growth figures reflect their lives. Media outlets are read as partisan weapons. Agencies once seen as competent are viewed as captured or out of touch. When people conclude the game is rigged, they split. Some disengage, refusing to vote, invest, or plan long-term. Others radicalize, demanding extreme answers. For businesses, this chaos has a price. How do you commit to a 10-year factory or multi-decade energy project when taxes, regulations, and trade rules can flip with each election? One administration pays you to build here. The next punishes you for the same decision. The result is hesitation, underinvestment, and a fixation on short-term gains. Investors demand higher returns for political risk. Some capital simply leaves. This is the feedback loop that turns a downturn into a slide. Economic pain breeds anger and populism. Populism rewards outrage over stability. Outrage produces erratic policy and symbolic fights instead of structural fixes. Instability scares off capital and talent. Their exit weakens growth and deepens fiscal strain, hardening the sense that the system is failing, which fuels even more anger. In markets, the same pattern plays out. Each time authorities intervene to stabilize asset prices or shield favored institutions, they confirm the suspicion that rules are flexible for the powerful and rigid for everyone else. Moral hazard becomes visible. Small investors and savers watch losses socialized and gains privatized and conclude fairness is irrelevant. Confidence shifts from the system to narrow defenses, cash under the mattress, hard assets, offshore accounts, anything but trust. Once confidence decays this far, even rational policy can fail, because no one believes the promise behind it. Announcements that once calmed markets are heard as spin. Reassurances from central banks and treasuries are discounted by citizens who remember transitory and contained on loop. In that environment, a rumor can move more money than a press conference. Here America's internal fractures meet the external reality. A system that relies on trust to function is drifting into an era where trust is scarce, and a changing world is increasingly ready to question or bypass American instability instead of absorbing it. Every system can limp along under internal strain for longer than it should. What ends that grace period are shocks from the outside, events that do not care about domestic narratives or election cycles. Right now, the world beyond America's borders is shifting into a configuration hostile to a leveraged, fragile superpower that assumes nothing truly breaks. Start with great power tensions. Rival blocs harden. Trade wars become tariffs. Export bans. Blacklists on chips. Software equipment. Sanctions weaponize payment networks and reserves. Resource nationalism rises as countries treat energy, food, minerals as strategic assets. Cyber capabilities grow while critical infrastructure, from grids to pipelines to payments, moves online, exposed. In that environment, what once felt like background noise becomes a direct hit. A regional war in an energy corridor sends oil and gas prices spiking, jamming transport costs, crushing budgets, ripping margins from shipping, airlines, logistics, manufacturing. A crisis in a chip hub does not just delay gadgets, it stalls autos, medical devices, defense systems, everything wired into a modern economy. Imagine a major shipping lane disrupted for weeks. Insurance costs soar, freight rates multiply, goods arrive late and expensively, if at all. Inventories thin. Smaller firms break because they cannot absorb the extra cost. Or a serious cyber attack on payment processors or banks, even if balances are restored. A few days of failed cards and payroll glitches expose how fast order unravels once it always works dies. These scenarios have already flickered. What has changed is the structure they would slam into. This is not the America of prior cycles, with modest debt, cheap energy, unchallenged dominance. It is a debt-saturated, over-financialized, politically fractured system, with thin buffers and eroding trust. The old response to external stress was simple: slash rates, print, run deficits, push pain outward through dollar strength. Now those levers are booby-trapped. Aggressive stimulus risks reigniting inflation and pushing others away from the dollar. Aggressive tightening risks detonating leverage at home. Industrial policy to onshore supply chains demands more borrowing from a strained bond market. So each solution to a shock inflames a different weakness. Bail out energy users, and deficits swell. Protect banks after a cyber scare, and moral hazard deepens. Subsidize chips and minerals, and you strain alliances already skeptical of U.S. commitments. Short-term calm, long-term corrosion. The deeper danger is psychological. A generation raised on stocked shelves, steady fuel, working cards, and distant wars faces rolling disruptions that feel targeted and personal. It becomes clear their stability rests on fragile chains, stretched across unstable or hostile regions. Each break reinforces the belief that no one competent is in charge. This is how external shocks turn controlled decline into freefall. They do not hit a solid structure. They hit a hollow core disguised by financial engineering and spin. They trigger price spikes households cannot absorb, losses businesses cannot hedge, and policy dilemmas leaders cannot solve without betraying previous promises. Which brings us to the question hanging over everything. If this trajectory holds more shocks, fewer cushions, less trust, what does total freefall look like on the ground? Not as theory, but in your savings, your job, your rent, your town. To see that, we have to zoom from the global map down to the street and face what this unraveling means for ordinary Americans who will not get a bailout. Freefall does not arrive with a single headline. It shows up as a slow rearranging of everyday life. First, the layoffs that were contained in tech start quietly spreading. Logistics firms trim shifts. Warehouses cut headcount. Retail chains close underperforming locations. Manufacturing plants in smaller towns move from overtime to hiring freezes to temporary furloughs that never fully reverse. Each announcement is framed as isolated and strategic. Together, they are a bleed. At the same time, bills stop getting paid on time. Credit card delinquencies edge higher each quarter. Auto loans slip as people choose to keep the lights on and food stocked instead of paying for a car already worth less than the debt on it. In weaker markets, a pattern appears. More eviction notices, more for sale signs that linger, more distressed listings as investors and overstretched owners try to exit. City and county budgets feel it next. With less sales and property tax, they cut back, fewer buses, slower emergency response, closed libraries, potholes that stay unfilled. This is the silent crash. No spectacular implosion, no clear event, just a steady downgrading of what used to be normal. Families trade down brands at the grocery store, then trade down quality, then quietly skip meals out. Medical appointments are delayed. Dental work waits. Repairs on cars and homes are put off, even when everyone knows that means bigger costs later. Vacations shrink or vanish. Retirement accounts get tapped just this once and never replenished. Walk through typical neighborhoods and you can feel it before you can graph it. Gas tanks rarely filled all the way, parents doing side gigs late at night, small shops closing without fanfare, replaced by empty windows or chains that hire fewer people on worse terms, for lease signs sit on office fronts for months. The optimism that once defined the middle class is replaced by a thin focus on surviving the next billing cycle. The impact is not uniform. Regions anchored by federal agencies, defense contracts, elite universities, or key energy and tech hubs may look strangely resilient. The restaurants stay busy. Housing is painful but occupied. These pockets become islands. Beyond them, zip codes tied to a single plant or distribution center hollow out fast. One closure or reroute, and a town's tax base, housing market, and small businesses unravel in sequence. Mobility, once America's escape valve, jams. In theory, you move to where the jobs are. In practice, you are locked in by an underwater mortgage, a lease you cannot break, children in schools you fear disrupting, or simply not enough savings to survive a relocation. Opportunities exist, but are geographically and financially out of reach. People stay put not because it is best, but because they are stuck. Inequality accelerates quietly. Those who entered this period with cash, credit, and information see distress as opportunity. They buy foreclosed homes, struggling businesses, land from owners desperate for liquidity. They pick up assets at a discount that will pay them for decades. Those forced to sell lose not just property but their main path to wealth. On charts, the crash can look muted. Indexes buoyed by a few mega corporations, unemployment padded by part-time and gig roles, inflation improving inside selective baskets. But for many Americans, freefall feels like permanent insecurity. No margin for error, no belief that playing by the rules leads anywhere better. That is the environment where the final question cannot be dodged. If the system is sliding, safety nets frayed, upside gated, what can individuals and communities do that is real, not fantasy, not denial, to protect themselves and adapt? You have seen the pieces. A debt trap that cannot be unwound cleanly. Policy whiplash that destroyed trust. A dollar slowly questioned. Industry and housing warped by financialization. Social fabric thinned. Politics weaponized. And a world more hostile than the one that built American dominance. Together they form not a doomsday prophecy, but a trajectory, controlled until it suddenly is not. You cannot fix this system alone. But you can refuse to be naive inside it. Cut fragile high-interest debt where you can. Diversify how you earn. Hold some reserves in essentials, not just abstractions on a screen. Know who holds your deposits, your brokerage, your pension. Invest in real-world skills and in relationships close enough to matter when distant promises fail. This is not a call to panic. It is a call to stop outsourcing your survival to institutions that tell you everything is fine until the moment it is not. The next few years will decide whether we face a brutal reset or slide into a long erosion most never escape. Do not wait for permission to start thinking clearly.